Okay, it is Wednesday, February 24th, 2021, and this is for International Foods. We are still focusing on our unit for our Western European foods, right? And we talked a lot yesterday about the foods of Italy, and today I'm going to show you guys how to make some homemade pasta, right? Now, this is something that can be done completely by hand. I am going to be using some machines in here just to speed up the process, but I'll talk to you about making different parts of this by hand at home. Okay, it's a little bit more time consuming, a little bit more muscles required to do everything by hand, especially the rolling part of it, but it is possible. Okay, so we're going to be starting off with our basic pasta dough, right? I have some I made earlier that we're going to be using to help roll it out, because it is best if you let the dough sit a minimum of a half hour in the fridge wrapped up. Okay, you want to give that gluten a chance to relax, to soften. It'll make it easier to roll. You can let it sit longer than that. I usually do at least a couple hours, right? So that the dough ends up becoming really pliable. I am going to be mixing the dough into a food processor, so it'll come together quickly, okay? So the first thing is the ingredients for the dough, right? So it's 2 ingredients. Now, some pastas are made with water. This one is an egg one, right? Ones with water tend to be a little softer, but I want something that's going to hold up its shape, because I'm going to show you guys for ravioli. Okay, so this is the flour here. This is Caputo. It is, what you're looking for is right here. It says Tipo 00. So a 00 flour. This is a soft, fine wheat flour that is ideal for making pasta. So I'm going to be using my scale today. Put the bowl on. Anytime you put a container on, you always want to hit that tare button to make sure that it zeroes out the number. And I'm going to be switching my units to grams for this part of it, right? So this is going to take 600 grams of the 00 flour. Now, if you're going to do this by hand, you could use a really large mixing bowl, right? And then put your eggs in the center in a well, right? Kind of make a pocket in the center of it, and then mix it by hand that way, okay? So slowly here. I said it's a good amount of flour. You know, this will make a good dough, generous portions of pasta. You can make some ahead. The pasta can be frozen. It can be dried as well. A smidge more. There we go. So that's our 600 grams of our 00 flour. And like I said, I am going to be using the food processor here today. So this is going to go straight into the food processor, and then we're going to measure out our eggs. So I've already got the blade attached on here. Whole thing right in. Get that out of the way. Now for the eggs, the recipe that's attached to the video and that I put in your Google Classroom says 6 large eggs. But what I've been finding lately in the grocery store is that the eggs are a little bit on the light side. So I like to do things by weight whenever possible to make it more, accurate as we go, right? So I'm going to reuse our same bowl here. Tear this out. So remember to always put things back to 0, okay? And we're going to do our eggs by weight. So it's going to be 370 grams. So it might be 6 eggs, it might be 8 eggs, okay? Now, if you get close to that amount, remember I'm cracking them off to the side so I can check each egg as they go in. Make sure I'm not getting any shells in my pasta. I don't want any blood spots or anything like that. So that one egg was about 50 grams. So we want to get to about 370 grams. Now, digital scales and things are not super expensive. You can get a good, decent digital scale easily for under $20, right? So, but having a scale on hand, especially if you like to do a lot of baking and things like this, you're looking for something that is all about precision, right? So like I said, we're trying to get close to that 370 grams. So we're at 200 grams right now. $294. So that's going to bring us to 343. So I may not need the whole last egg. So what you can do So I'm going to take out the yolk because I want a little bit more of that fat content. 370 on the money. Excellent. So that little bit of egg white, you can save to the side. You can use that for brushing your pasta, right? So it won't go to waste. Now you can break up your eggs just a little bit. Kind of start them mixing, right? Because we've already got our 00, 600 grams in the food processor. This is our 370 grams of eggs, so whole eggs, right? Like I said, when in doubt, if you need a little bit extra egg, I usually tend to go with the yolk. A little bit of more fat content in there. Now this is going to go right into the food processor, right? Like I said, the blade's already in there. We're going to pour that around. And this will go very quick, right? Like I said, this can be done by hand. The whole process in a giant bowl. Make a well, pour your eggs right in the center. It's just going to need a lot of mixing, right? So now this has a pulse feature on your food processors. I'll put my hand over the top so that way no liquid can come out of the spot. You want to use that pulse mode. I know it's a little bit loud, but I want to make sure that the ingredients are mixing up and throughout. Now, the thing about flour, too, is it takes time for flour to absorb that moisture. So give it a minute for it to come together. The texture, it's starting to stick, right? So it's already on the sticky side. Nice, warm to the touch. So see how the machine, you start to sound like it's struggling? A couple more quick pulses, and then I'm going to stop, right? We don't want to burn out the motor on the machine. But at this point, it's now come together in lumps. But it still needs to be worked a little bit by hand. So even though you use a machine, you still got to put a little bit of muscle into it, okay? So, detach this here, right? I'm going to dump our dough right onto the counter. And this is a clean counter, of course, right? It's clean and sanitized and dry beforehand. Okay. You want to make sure you don't have any chemicals or anything on your counter. So now this is our dough, right? Doesn't look like much just yet. I'll put a little bit of flour here on the surface. Go easy on adding any extra flour in. Okay. Now, one thing about pasta dough, it's not as compliant as a bread dough. Okay, so you've got to keep that in mind. When you're trying to knead it, you're not going to be able to push forward like you will with a nice bread dough. But the goal is instead to kind of curve in those outside edges and then push those out. You want to start to bring this together. Now, you can't really overwork this because you're going to give it that time for that dough to rest. Okay, so you can knead this for a good 10 minutes, but like I said, see how it doesn't really kind of come together in the center? That's okay. Still working that dough. This is where you want to put a little bit of muscle behind it, right? And I will work this more later on, okay? Now, this is your dough, right? You want to make sure that it doesn't sit out in the air because that will dry it out. So what I'm going to do is take a little bit of plastic wrap, right here, and completely cover the dough, right? Like I said, and after you knead this for about 5 to 8 minutes or so, you know, get a good workout, get out all your frustrations from the day out, right? Set this in the fridge, let it sit, let it rest. You need time for that gluten to relax, right? Gluten is what gives you that really nice stretch in pizza dough. But it doesn't like to stretch unless it has time to kind of chill for a little bit. It's going to absorb the moisture. It's going to relax. It's going to make it easier to roll out your pasta. All right, so let me just stick this to the side here. And then we're going to set up for our rolling. Now, I do have a rolling attachment, right, set up for you guys. But like I said, you can also do this by hand, but it's going to be a longer process if you're trying to do it by hand. I'll show you that in a second. So we've got here my KitchenAid set up. Now this has a roller cutting set. And these are a little on the pricey side. You can get ones that mount to your counter as well. Like this one here is to cut fettuccine. The one I have on right now is smooth on the inside. So it's just going to make it into thinner pasta sheets, right? Which is what we'll need for our ravioli. But what we also need for the ravioli, before I start to roll out my pre-made dough, right, is a little bit of filling. So I'm going to show you guys a simple ricotta filling, right? Ricotta cheese, which is delish. A little bit of parmesan. So we're going to take another little bowl here on my scale, and I'm going to measure out just a small portion of this. I'll give you the measurements for this for the full-size batch. So I'm just doing a third of a recipe, which is going to be about 5 ounces of ricotta cheese. Full batch would use a whole 15-ounce container. A little bit too much. Perfect. So 5 ounces of ricotta. And we're going to do a generous tablespoon of grated parmesan, which I already have here grated and ready to go. This is a fresh block parmesan. Nice heaping, generous tablespoon. I'm also going to add into this a little bit of whole nutmeg, right? And nutmeg is always better and stronger when it's ground fresh. And this is what the nut looks like. I've got my little microplane grater, but you could also use a little box grater and just use the finest side on that. So we're going to give a few good scrapes of nutmeg there, right? You can see that. And just the aroma of the fresh nutmeg, so much better. So be using it for drinks and things, coffee and tea, hot chocolate. Amazing. So we're going to add in a little bit of black pepper. Say a little. I like black pepper. A couple of really good cranks of black pepper. And a good generous pinch of kosher salt, right? And that is your filling for your raviolis, right? Super simple. That's it. Take this off the scale. Just give it a good stir. If your ricotta, when you open it up, is really watery, you can put it into a strainer, real fine mesh strainer, and let that moisture leach out a little bit. So if it's got too much liquid, but this one here is really nice and thick, right? And there's your ricotta filling. So this is great for inside tortellinis, raviolis, all kinds of things, right? Even a lasagna. All right. So now we've got our filling set. We've got our dough already, right? So this is dough that I made ahead of time. So I wanted to have this, have a chance to sit and relax and chill in the fridge. Okay. Take this here. I'm going to put a little flour on my counter. All right. It was a little tacky from being chilled. So don't be afraid to use flour. This is one of those things. It's not like a pie crust. You can actually kind of go a little heavier on flour for this to make sure that you're not sticking to everything, right? So flour all the way around. Now, another thing that's good and handy to have on hand is a bench scraper or something like this. A nice chef knife, so that way you can cut the dough into chunks, workable pieces. So I'm just going to cut a slice off of this dough so I can use this into my machine to roll it nice and thin. So I'm just going to pat this out a little bit by hand. And you can see this one, you know, compared to that dough that I was just rolling, right, that I just made, this one is soft, it's tender, it's pliable, right? It's had that time to relax. So now it's going to be much more cooperative for putting it through the machine. So I'm going to pull this over here closer for you guys. Give me 1 sec. Now this is a strange looking attachment when you put this all together. But here it is, right? On the front of a KitchenAid mixer, there's a little hub there. There's a little nut. This piece locks into place. You want to make sure that it's nice and tight. And then this will still spin on the bottom, but this is rolling on the inside. Okay, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to give you a close-up view so you can see the roller is actually moving. Okay, pretty neat. But like I said, you can roll this by hand, but you want to get it super, super thin to where you can almost see through the pasta dough, like to the shadows of my countertop here. Okay. Now I have multiple settings on this, so it goes from 1 to 8. And so you want to make sure that you have some flour on your dough, especially to start. Okay. Now you want to start off with 1. That's the widest setting, and the higher the number goes, the smaller it gets. Okay. This is still pretty thick, right? But it's already starting to be much more cooperative, right? If anybody who does cakes and things like that, right, this is also great for things like fondant. You can fold it over in half, run it through again. We just want to get this process started. Okay, now I'm going to go up to a 3. So I want to start to show you how this gets thinner. But so you can see the thickness of this. It's still really fairly thick. Too thick for what we're doing. We're going to take and run this through. Okay. Right? You can go through a couple of times on each setting. And you can keep this as sheets, so if you're making things like ravioli or lasagna. Go up a couple more steps, up to a 5. Notice I'm using my hands to support, right, on both sides. You don't need to go any faster on the speed, because this way you'll be able to keep up with it, right? But you can already start to see that it's getting super thick. Okay, so we're going to go up to a 7. And giving that dough time to chill and relax in the fridge really helps with getting the consistency that you want. Okay? Yeah. Okay, so that should be good. Shut our machine off. I'm going to put a little flour on the dough, right? Because I want to make sure that I'm not going to be stuck to the counter. Right? You don't want to go through all this work and then everything is stuck and you can't pull it off. Okay. So a little bit more, use that same 00 flour, right? And this is what will start to kind of dry out your pasta a little bit. But this way, you want to make sure that it stays movable. When you're looking at that, I can see some of the shadows of my counter underneath, right? So I know that this is good here. Now, for making ravioli, right? This is perfect for this size. I can take and I can make some nice big raviolis, right? The idea is spacing it out. They do make things like this, which is a ravioli cutter. Right? There's also little pizza wheels and things that you can use that have this is a pastry wheel, right? Because it's smooth on one wheel. And then it has the crinkled edge, the crimped edge on this side. So you can use this to cut with as well. Like I said, this also has the crimped edge. And there are actually ravioli pans that you can use as well to take and kind of mold it and lay it in, put your filling and things. But the idea is that you want to make, you know, an educated guess as much as possible on the sizing, right? So I'll bring it this way a little bit more. And you can kind of map it out, you know, so if you're not sure, just lightly press on there, you know, and kind of give yourself a little cheat guide. I'm just barely pressing, right? And then I know where my filling is going to go, about the center of each ravioli, right? And I know how many I can get. So I can get 7 big ones out of this one strip, right? And that was only a little slice off of my dough. So that big ball of dough you saw can make quite a bit. Now with the filling, it's going right into the center of where your ravioli is going to be. So about a good teaspoonful or so. You don't want it to be too much filling, because it will ooze out when you try to seal it. We don't want that. We want the filling to stay on the inside. Make sure your hands are clean, obviously, when you're doing this type of stuff. And you could do things with like already cooked meat, right? Beef sausages. You could do some, you know, cheese and spinach. It's a lot of options for a filling, right? Now, with this here, You can take and use just a little bit of water or a little bit of egg and a pastry brush, right? Nice clean pastry brush. What I'm going to do is I'm going to be folding this over, okay, and trimming it out that way. And I'm going to know where each ravioli is because there's going to be a little mound there. And so I want my brush damp. I'm going to give it a little brush along the edge of where it would seal. So basically go around your filling. So just a little bit, because we dried it out with that flour, we want to make sure that these are going to stick together, right? So you want to come in, so it'll be on both sides of where you're going to cut. Okay, and that's it. So now flip it up, right? You can always use things like the bench scraper to help with that process, right? If you need an extra set of hands, you can come in and flip it up that way. I usually just start right in the center. Make sure that we're covering all of this. Now you can re-roll the excess, but the thing is it does get tough. So you'd want to let it relax again. And the re-roll stuff is never as good, especially for sheets like this. So it might be good for cutting things like hand cutting into fettuccine and things, right? So what I'm doing here is just I'm squeezing out the air on each side of my little mound of filling. I started in the back and I'm working to the front and pressing lightly, right? So that way I make sure that I've got my filling centered, but it's sealed all the way around the filling. So start in the back, push that air forward. Make sure you have a good seal on the front. Now, homemade pasta, you can do a couple of things. You can cook these right away, right? You can also freeze them, right? So like I said, I could use my ravioli cutter here. You know, you can always have a little flour on your counter. Come in and press down. You want to give this a good press, pull away the excess, right? And there's your ravioli. So with the stamp style like this, or you can use the little cutter, right? Excess off. So if I'm going to use the cutter, I'll come in and I'll trim along the edges as a strip. On this edge, so I get that nice little decorative pattern on both sides, right? And then come in and cut in between to separate them. So just aim for the center between the two. There you go. All right. So that's our ravioli, right? Nice, filled, nice little pillowy pocket, right? So what I did is I did make some of these ahead of time, but I want to make sure that these aren't going to get stuck on my counter, right? So what I'm going to do is just take a sheet pan here. You can use a little parchment or wax paper if you want, but I'm just going to put a little bit of that flour onto the tray, and then I'm going to lay these on top just to make sure that they're not sticking to anything. And this is the best way to put them into the freezer. Put them in, let them freeze overnight. Then you can take them off the tray, pop them into a Ziploc bag, and then you're good to go. And then you can have raviolis anytime that you want. So let me just move this to the side here. Grab the other ones. They're all done. So I did do some slightly smaller ones, but these are that are frozen, right? So they're all set. They're good to go. Like I said, you can throw them into a bag at this point because they're not going to stick to each other, okay? Now, when you're cooking fresh pasta, so if I was doing a fettuccine or things like that, you want to make sure that your water that you're using is salted very heavily, right? A little bit more than your regular box dry pasta, right? Because there is no salt in the pasta dough that we made fresh. So I want to heavily salt because that's what's going to season my raviolis, right? I've got this water bubbling back here. It's been sitting there simmering for a little bit. And I'm just going to take and drop these straight into the pot. Now, raviolis and things will float when they are done. So that'll be our way that we know that they're ready, right? And then you want to have just a little bit of sauce to toss them with, right? Whenever you're making fresh pastas and things, you know, you want to get them straight from the pot. Couple of minutes time that it takes for fresh pasta, 2-3 minutes. Being frozen, they take slightly longer. Just give them a little stir here to make sure that everything's got its own space. And I'm going to bring it in for a closer look, right? So you can see there. Okay. So as they start to cook, they will float to the surface. All right. Now, like I said, this machine also has a tool to cut fettuccine. Right. I wanted to show you guys this as well. That I did some of these earlier. So I cut the fettuccine and then I bundled them up. A little bit of flour. These are also going to go in the freezer in little nests, little bundles. And then that way you can just drop them into the boiling water the same way as the ravioli. But this is a good way to dry it. You can also dry your pasta by hanging it, right? So if they have all these specialty drying racks and things that you can buy, you don't need to buy that. Get a clean coat hanger. Sanitize it. Make sure it's clean, especially like those plastic ones, right? And then take and hang your fettuccine off the hanger. Hang it somewhere in the house, you know, where nobody can get to it, especially any pets and things. And then let it air dry overnight. Then you can put it into a container, a bag, and then you're good to go. All right. So my raviolis are starting to float. And I have a little bit of a marinara sauce over here. That's on low. Now, the Italian way, right, is to always put things directly into your sauce to finish. Take our ravioli here. Straight into the sauce. Don't mind if a little bit of pasta water gets in because that'll actually help, right, with the consistency of the sauce, especially if the sauce is too thick. All right. And this, like I said, the sauce has been on low, so we're just going to give this a good stir for our ravioli. Right, but you can make these things at home, and that's what makes it fun, is that you're doing something that, yeah, you could easily go buy, but you know exactly what ingredients are in it, right? You're controlling that. Got my plate, right? So like I said, this is just a simple basil marinara sauce. Okay. Going to plate our raviolis. So 8, 7, 8, that's a good portion size, right? Because these are very filling because of all that cheese and everything else, right? So if you're trying to figure out a size, of course, we want to make sure we get all that extra sauce in there. It was about 3/4 cup of sauce for a serving. And then you can finish this off with a little bit of freshly grated Parmesan cheese, right? And that is your homemade raviolis, right? Not as hard as you think. Like I said, it takes a little bit of work. You know, just remember that when you're making the pasta dough, do it by weight whenever possible to make sure you get that ratio that works really well. Let the dough rest a minimum of 30 minutes in the fridge. Longer if you can, right? About 2 hours, I recommend, honestly. And then when you're rolling it, try and get it as thin as you can to make your cuts. Like I said, I'll post the recipe with the video for the ricotta filling because that was not in your Google Classroom. But I'll make sure that you have it with the video, okay? So that's it. That is your homemade Italian pasta.